The widow stood trembling in the dust, her children clinging to her empty dress. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Please take my children. They haven't eaten in days." The poor rancher froze. He owned almost nothing, except a heart that refused to turn away from suffering. The sun was sinking behind the dry hills when Clara fell to her knees outside the small ranch house. Her body was weak from hunger, but it was her children's hollow eyes that broke her spirit. 2 boys and a little girl clung to her, ribs showing through torn clothes. She had walked for hours, barefoot, driven by desperation. Her husband had died months earlier, crushed under debt and illness, leaving her with nothing but grief and mouths she could no longer feed. Pride had kept her silent for too long, but starvation had stripped it away. The rancher, Eli, stood frozen in his doorway. His land was dry, his barn half empty, his own meals often skipped. He was a man familiar with loss, with nights where hunger argued with dignity. Clara lifted her head, tears carving paths through dust on her cheeks. "I'll work," she whispered. "Anything. Just don't let them starve." Eli's heart pounded. He saw his own childhood reflected in those children. Memories of an empty table and a mother who pretended not to be hungry. He knew the weight of deciding who eats and who doesn't. The world had never been kind to people like them. Still, this choice felt heavier than any burden he had ever carried. Silence stretched between them, thick and unforgiving, as fate waited for his answer. Clara's hands shook as she pulled her children closer. Her youngest, Anna, barely had the strength to cry anymore. That terrified her more than tears ever could. "They're good children," Clara said quickly, fear rushing her words. "They listen. They won't be trouble." Each sentence felt like she was selling pieces of her soul. Eli stepped closer, noticing how the boy tried to hide his hunger by standing tall, how the girl leaned against her mother as if sleep was safer than hope. He swallowed hard. "How long since they ate?" he asked quietly. 2 days, Clara admitted. "I gave them my share before that." Shame burned in her chest, but love burned stronger. She had already decided, better to lose them than bury them. Eli turned away, staring at his land. The soil was unforgiving, just like life had been. He thought of the nights he had begged God for mercy and received only silence. He thought of the promise he had once made to himself. If he ever had enough to share, he would. When he turned back, his eyes were wet. "I can't just take your children," he said softly. Clara's heart sank. But then he continued, voice steady, unbreakable. "If they stay, you stay too." Her breath caught. She hadn't expected kindness. Not like this. Not when he had so little himself. Clara stared at him, unsure if hunger had made her imagine his words. You take me too?" she asked, barely audible. Her entire life had taught her that help always came with limits, conditions, or cruelty. Eli nodded. "A family doesn't survive by breaking apart," he said. "They survive by holding on tighter." He knelt beside the children, offering them bread from his own kitchen. It wasn't much, but to them it was everything. They ate slowly at first, afraid it might disappear if they rushed. Clara watched, sobbing silently. Relief flooded her body, so fast it almost made her dizzy. For the first time in months, she wasn't choosing who would suffer less. Someone else had chosen all of them. That night, the ranch felt different. Crowded, yes, but warmer. Clara insisted on cleaning, cooking, helping any way she could. Eli didn't stop her. He understood the need to feel useful, to repay kindness with effort. As they sat at the table, sharing a meal made from scraps and care, something unspoken passed between them. This wasn't charity. It was survival shared. Outside, the wind howled across the fields, but inside, for hungry hearts felt full for the first time in a long while. Days turned into weeks. Clara worked tirelessly, her body exhausted but her spirit slowly healing. She repaired clothes, tended the animals, and stretched every meal with creativity born from hardship. The children laughed again, softly at first, like laughter needed permission. Eli noticed the change. The ranch no longer felt like a place of quiet defeat. It felt alive. Still poor. Still fragile. But alive. At night, Clara sometimes cried quietly, guilt gnawing at her. She wondered if she had done the right thing. If a mother should ever ask another to save her children. Eli overheard once. He didn't interrupt. Instead, the next morning, he said gently, "You didn't abandon them. You fought for them." Those words stayed with her. Yet life tested them again. A drought came early that year. Crops failed. Supplies ran low. Fear returned like an old enemy. Clara offered to leave, to take the children away before they became a burden. Eli shook his head. "We face storms together," he said. "Or not at all." In that moment, Clara realized kindness wasn't just about saving someone once. It was about choosing them again, every day. Even when it was hard. One evening, as the children slept, Clara finally spoke the words that had been living inside her chest. "Why did you do it?" she asked Eli. "You didn't have to save us." He stared into the lantern light, jaw tight. "Because once," he said, "someone looked at me the way you looked at me that day, and they turned away." His voice cracked. "I promised myself I wouldn't be that person." Silence followed, heavy but honest. Clara felt something shift. Not romance, not yet, but deep respect. Shared scars recognize each other. That night, she prayed differently. Not for escape, not for miracles, but for strength to deserve the mercy she'd been given. Outside, the land was still dry, the future uncertain. But inside that small ranch house, something powerful had taken root. Compassion strong enough to survive hunger, fear, and loss. And though none of them knew it yet, this choice, made in desperation, was quietly shaping a second chance that would change all their lives forever. The drought tightened its grip on the land, turning soil into cracked skin and hope into a fragile thing. Clara woke before dawn each day, rationing flour, counting beans, measuring every grain like it mattered, because it did. The children noticed. They stopped asking for seconds. Hunger teaches silence early. Eli sold one of his calves at the market, returning with less money than expected. Prices were cruel when desperation was obvious. That night, he sat alone in the barn, head in his hands, wondering if kindness had finally cost too much. But then he heard laughter, soft, cautious laughter, from inside the house. Clara was telling the children a story by lantern light, turning hardship into adventure, fear into something manageable. Eli felt shame for doubting his choice. Poverty had taught him survival, but Clara had taught him dignity within it. Later, Clara approached him carefully. "We can manage," she said. "I've lived with less." "That's not the point," Eli replied. "You shouldn't have to." Their eyes met, understanding passing between them. Sacrifice wasn't loud. It was quiet, daily, unseen, the kind that asked nothing in return. That night, Eli skipped dinner without telling anyone. Clara noticed anyway. She quietly split her portion, slipping it onto his plate. No words, no gratitude expected. In that small exchange, something unbreakable formed. Not romance, not obligation, but trust. The kind that grows only when two broken people decide to protect each other, even when they have nothing left to give. Winter arrived early, cruel and uninvited. The wind cut through the ranch house walls, carrying the thread of sickness and hunger. Clara wrapped the children in extra blankets, humming softly, the same song her mother once sang to her during hard nights. Anna fell ill first. Fever stole her appetite and left her small body trembling. Clara didn't sleep, cooling her forehead, whispering prayers she wasn't sure anyone still heard. Eli rode through the night to fetch medicine, trading tools he couldn't afford to lose. When he returned, exhausted and empty-handed, Clara's heart sank. "They had none," he said quietly, "but I brought soup." It wasn't much, but it was warmth, effort proof. Anna survived the night. Clara cried alone at dawn, guilt crushing her chest. She blamed herself for staying, for hoping, for believing kindness could outrun reality. She considered leaving again, slipping away before she took more than she could ever repay. Eli found her packing. "If you leave," he said gently, "you'll take part of this home with you." She froze. "I never wanted to be a burden." "You're not," he said firmly. "You're the reason this place feels alive." In that moment, Clara understood something painful and beautiful. Accepting kindness was sometimes harder than surviving without it, but healing required both courage and humility. And maybe staying was its own act of bravery. Spring came slowly, uncertain, like it didn't trust the land any more than the land trusted it. The first rain fell quietly at night, tapping the roof like a promise whispered rather than declared. Clara stood outside barefoot, letting the drops soak her skin, tears mixing freely with water from the sky. The crops didn't flourish instantly, but they tried, and so did they. Eli taught the boys how to mend fences. Clara planted vegetables behind the house, her hands deep in the soil, believing effort itself was hope. Neighbors began to notice. Not wealth, there was none, but resilience. One woman brought bread, another offered seeds. Kindness, once sparked, traveled faster than despair. One evening, as they shared a modest meal, Anna looked at Eli and asked, "Are you our family now?" The question hung heavy. Clara held her breath. Eli smiled softly. "If you'll have me." Clara felt her chest ache. Family, she realized, wasn't blood alone. It was choice. It was staying when leaving would be easier. That night, she wrote a letter to her late husband, telling him she hadn't failed. She had survived. Their children were safe, loved. Outside, the fields glistened under moonlight, still fragile, still uncertain, but growing, just like them. Sometimes second chances didn't arrive loudly. Sometimes they grew quietly, fed by rain, patience, and the courage to believe life could still be kind. With spring came memories Clara had tried to bury. Watching Eli work the land reminded her of her husband, his laugh, his dreams, his promises. Grief returned in waves, unexpected and sharp. Some nights she couldn't breathe through it. Eli noticed. He never pushed. He simply sat nearby, present without demand. One evening, she finally spoke. "I'm afraid to feel happy," she admitted, "like it would mean I forgot him." Eli shook his head. "Love doesn't disappear when someone dies," he said. "It changes shape." Those words settled deep. Claire began to understand that grief and gratitude could exist together, that healing wasn't betrayal. The children healed too. They grew stronger, louder, curious again. Hunger loosened its grip, replaced by routine, laughter, scraped knees. But the ranch still struggled. A storm destroyed part of the fence. Repairs meant debt. Eli considered selling the land. Clara overheard and felt panic rise. This place had become their anchor. That night, she placed her wedding ring on the table. "Sell this," she said quietly. Eli refused instantly. "That's your past." "It's also our future," she replied. "He'd want this." In that sacrifice, Clara felt no loss, only purpose. Love, she realized, could be honored not by holding on, but by building something new from its ashes. The fence was rebuilt, slowly, painfully, together. Every nail driven felt like a small victory against a world that had tried to break them. The ring paid for supplies. The land stayed. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Eli and Clara sat side by side on the porch. Silence wrapped around them. Not awkward, not empty, but full. "I don't know what this is," Clara said finally, "but I know it saved us." Eli nodded. "It saved me too." They didn't name it. Some things didn't need names. Compassion had done its work quietly, without expectation of reward. Inside, the children slept peacefully, bellies full, dreams untroubled. Clara watched them and felt something unfamiliar, peace without fear. She thought back to that day in the dust, when she had begged a stranger to take her children. She had expected loss. Instead, she found belonging. Life was still hard. Money was still scarce. The future was still uncertain, but love had taken root where despair once lived. And Clara understood the truth she would carry forever. Sometimes, when you ask the world to save what you love most, it gives you more than survival. It gives you a second chance, wrapped in sacrifice, sealed with kindness, and held together by the quiet bravery of choosing each other. Summer arrived with unforgiving heat, but the ranch endured. The crops stood thin yet stubborn, much like the people tending them. Clara rose each morning with purpose now, no longer driven only by fear, but by belonging. Still, uncertainty lingered. Stability felt fragile, like happiness borrowed rather than owned. One afternoon, a letter arrived, an overdue notice from the bank. Eli read it twice, jaw tightening. The land was at risk again. Clara watched him carefully, recognizing the weight behind his silence. That night, she couldn't sleep. She replayed every kindness he had shown them, every sacrifice made quietly. By morning, she had decided something difficult. She gathered the children and told them the truth, gently, honestly. "We might have to fight again," she said, "but we fight together." The boys nodded. Anna hugged her tight. Clara approached Eli later. "We can open the ranch," she suggested. "Sell produce. Take small jobs. I'll help." He hesitated. Pride warred with survival. Then he exhaled. "All right." They worked harder than ever. Clara sold bread and preserves in town. Eli repaired fences for neighbors. The children helped where they could. Exhaustion followed them everywhere, but so did determination. Each small success felt earned. For the first time since her husband's death, Clara didn't feel like life was happening to her. She was shaping it again, through effort, courage, and the fragile but growing belief that this family, formed through kindness, was worth fighting for. The town slowly warmed to them. People who once looked away now stopped to talk, to buy, to help. Not out of pity, but respect. They saw something rare. People refusing to give up on each other. One evening, after a long day, Clara collapsed onto the porch steps, tears slipping free. "I'm so tired," she admitted. "Some days I'm afraid I'll break." Eli sat beside her. "You already broke," he said softly, "and you're still here." Those words stayed with her. Strength, she realized, wasn't never falling. It was standing again without losing compassion. That night, a storm hit without warning. Wind tore through the fields, rain flooding the ground. Eli ran outside to secure the barn. Clara followed, fear clawing at her chest. A beam fell, narrowly missing him. She screamed his name, heart stopping. When the storm passed, they stood soaked and shaking, alive, together. Clara hugged him tightly, trembling. "I can't lose you," she whispered before she could stop herself. Eli froze, then held her just as tightly. No promises were spoken. None were needed. Loss had taught them both the cost of love. But in that moment, they chose it anyway. Not recklessly, bravely. Because sometimes, the greatest act of courage is allowing yourself to care again, knowing full well how much it can hurt. After the storm, something shifted between them. Not urgency, not romance, but honesty. They spoke more openly about fear, regret, and the lives they never planned. Clara told Eli about the nights she still dreamed of her husband, how grief came without warning. Eli listened without jealousy, without discomfort. "He mattered," he said simply. "That doesn't disappear." Eli shared his own truth, how loneliness had hollowed him out long before Clara arrived. "This land kept me alive," he admitted, "but it didn't keep me human." The children noticed the change too. Laughter came easier. Meals felt lighter. Even struggle felt shared rather than endured alone. Then, an unexpected offer arrived. A wealthy buyer wanted Eli's land, for a price that could erase every debt. It was tempting. It was safe. Clara said nothing at first. That night, she finally spoke. "If you sell," she said carefully, "I'll understand." Eli stared at the fields. "And if I don't?" She smiled faintly. "Then I'll stay, no matter how hard it gets." Eli realized the truth then. The ranch was no longer just land. It was a place where broken people rebuilt themselves, where kindness had taken root. Selling would mean survival. Staying would mean meaning. For the first time, he chose meaning. The decision wasn't easy, but it was final. Eli declined the offer. The future remained uncertain, but it was theirs. That evening, the children celebrated with homemade cake, laughing as if victory tasted sweet. Clara watched them, heart full. She realized this wasn't just shelter anymore. It was home. Later, after the children slept, Eli spoke quietly. "I don't know what the right word is for us," he said. Clara met his eyes. "We don't need one." They sat in silence, hands close but not touching. Some bonds grew best without rushing. Clara thought of the day she had begged him to take her children. She had expected separation. Instead, she found unity. Healing, she learned, didn't erase scars. It taught you how to live with them, without letting them define you. Eli looked at her then, really looked. Not as a burden, not as someone to save, but as an equal. "You didn't just survive here," he said. "You changed this place." Clara smiled through tears. "You gave us the chance." Outside, the land rested under starlight, still imperfect, still struggling, but alive. Like them, some families were born, others were chosen, and the chosen ones, built through sacrifice and compassion, often held stronger than anything blood alone could offer. Time passed. Slowly, kindly. The ranch never became wealthy, but it became steady. Enough food, enough warmth, enough love. Clara stood one morning watching the children run through the fields, laughter echoing across the land. She thought of the woman she had been, starving, desperate, ready to disappear for their sake. That woman still lived inside her, but she was no longer alone. Eli joined her, quiet as always. "You know," he said, "that day you asked me to take your children, it saved me too." She looked at him, surprised. "I was surviving," he continued. "You gave me a reason to live." Emotion swelled in her chest. Gratitude, love, something deeper. They didn't promise forever. Life had taught them how fragile promises were. Instead, they chose presence, loyalty, compassion. That night, Clara wrote again to her late husband. She told him their children were safe, strong, loved. She told him she had found kindness in the most unexpected place. And for the first time, the letter ended without tears. Because healing didn't mean forgetting. It meant carrying love forward into new days, new bonds, and second chances born from the courage to say yes when everything inside you is afraid. Autumn arrived quietly, painting the land in gold and rust. The ranch looked different now, not richer, but fuller. The soil held promise again, and so did the people who worked it. Clara noticed how the children carried themselves with confidence, no longer shrinking from hunger or fear. Safety had reshaped them. One afternoon, the youngest boy asked, "Mama, were we always this happy?" Clara's throat tightened. "No," she answered honestly, "but we learned how." That night, she and Eli sat by the fire, watching sparks rise into the dark. "I used to believe kindness was dangerous," Clara admitted, "that it made you weak." Eli smiled faintly. "It almost destroyed me once too, but refusing it destroyed me faster." They spoke of the past without pain now, only memory. Loss no longer screamed. It whispered, and whispers could be carried. The world outside remained uncertain. Harvests could fail. Illness could return. Life could still be cruel. But Clara no longer felt powerless. She had learned that strength wasn't standing alone. It was standing together. Eli looked at her then, eyes steady. "No matter what comes," he said, "you don't face it alone again." She nodded, tears shining. That promise, unspoken yet firm, settled into her bones. Some rescues didn't end at survival. Some continued quietly, day by day, through shared burdens and chosen loyalty. And that kind of rescue, Clara knew, was the rarest of all. Winter returned, but this time it felt different. The cold still crept in, but fear no longer followed. The children prepared for school. Clara stitched coats from donated fabric. Eli stocked firewood with practiced care. One evening, a stranger arrived at the ranch, thin, nervous, desperate. Clara recognized the look instantly. It was the same look she once carried. The woman whispered, "I heard you help people." Eli glanced at Clara. She didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, offering water, warmth, a seat. Not promises, but dignity. Later that night, Clara sat alone, overwhelmed. "What if we give too much?" she asked. "What if we lose everything?" Eli answered quietly, "Then we'll still have who we are." The realization struck her hard. Kindness had changed them permanently. They were no longer people who turned away. That night, Clara dreamed of her past, but instead of desperation, she felt peace. She woke knowing something essential had healed. She had once begged someone to take her children. Now she was the one opening the door. Pain had taught her empathy. Hunger had taught her generosity. Loss had taught her what mattered. And she understood something powerful. The greatest legacy wasn't what you owned. It was who you saved when you had every reason not to. Sometimes, second chances don't arrive to fix your life. Sometimes, they arrive to change who you become. The years moved forward gently. The ranch became known, not for abundance, but for mercy. Travelers stopped. Neighbors helped. Stories spread quietly, the way truth always does. One spring morning, Anna, now older, steadier, asked Clara, "Why did that man help us?" Clara thought carefully. Because once he needed help too. The children grew up understanding something most adults never learned. Compassion wasn't weakness. It was courage practiced daily. Eli watched them with pride, knowing his decision years ago had shaped lives far beyond his own. He never called himself a hero. He simply remembered how it felt to be invisible, and chose differently. Clara often returned to that memory as well, standing in the dust, ready to disappear. She had believed she was giving her children away. In truth, she had found a family. One evening, she and Eli stood together watching the sunset. No words passed between them. None were needed. Their bond had been built in sacrifice, sealed by trust. Life never became easy, but it became meaningful. Clara realized then, love didn't save them from suffering. It taught them how to endure it without losing themselves. And maybe that was the miracle people searched for. Not rescue from pain, but the strength to carry it with grace, alongside someone who refused to let you fall alone. On the anniversary of the day Clara arrived at the ranch, the family shared a simple meal. Laughter filled the air. Gratitude sat quietly at the table. Clara excused herself afterward, walking to the edge of the field. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply. "We made it," she whispered, to herself, to the past, to the love she once lost. Eli joined her, standing beside her without interruption. "You didn't just survive," he said. "You built something." She smiled softly. "So did you." They stood together, watching the land stretch endlessly before them. Still imperfect, still demanding, still home. Clara thought of the moment she had asked him to take her children. How fear had driven her words. How kindness had answered them. That moment had reshaped everything. She understood now that asking for help wasn't surrender, it was faith. Faith that someone, somewhere, might choose compassion over comfort. And when they did, it created ripples, generations of them. That night, Clara slept peacefully, no longer haunted by hunger or guilt. She had learned that love didn't always arrive wrapped in certainty. Sometimes, it arrived as a stranger who said, "I'll take you too." And in doing so, changed the meaning of family forever. Years later, Clara told the story herself, not as tragedy, but as testimony. She spoke of hunger, fear, and impossible choices. But she always ended the same way. "One man had almost nothing," she said, "and still, he gave everything that mattered." The children listened, grown now, carrying the lesson forward. Kindness wasn't inherited by blood, but by example. Clara looked at Eli, gratitude shining in her eyes. "You saved us," she said quietly. He shook his head. "We saved each other." The truth settled gently between them. Life had broken them both once. Compassion had rebuilt them together. The ranch stood as proof, not of success, but of mercy. And Clara knew this. The moment she asked someone to take her children, she didn't lose her family. She found it. Sometimes the world answers desperation with cruelty. But sometimes, if you're brave enough to ask, and someone brave enough to care, it answers with love. And that love, once chosen, becomes a shelter no storm can destroy. Some stories remind us that kindness doesn't require abundance, only courage. When compassion meets desperation, lives are transformed forever. If this story touched your heart, like the video, subscribe, and join our Heart Angels family, where humanity still matters.